They hadn't fired a gun since 2011, and now that the Basque separatists of ETA have officially announced they're dissolving in a communique, one can only wonder, will there be genuine closure? With many militants still behind bars and Spain haunted by the memory of the more than 800 killed by the leftist separatist group, we'll hear a Spanish prime minister who's unforgiving and who claims it was police, not peace mediators, who ended decades of conflict. So did ETA win or lose? It may be the end of one of Western Europe's last armed movements, but you only need to look at east of the Basque Country to Catalonia to find separatism and regional revolt against the nation-state on the rise. Why is that? Why is the form of separatism changing? What has changed in those years? Today in the France 24 debate, we're looking at the dissolution of ETA. With us, Spanish attorney and commentator Eduard Salsas, who's half Catalan himself.
Yes.
Thank you for being with us. From San Sebastian, in the Spanish Basque Country, Gorka Elejabarrieta, head of the international affairs at the left-wing nationalist party Sortu. Thank you for joining us.
Good evening.
And from Birmingham in England, Caroline Gray, who lectures at Aston University, co-author of Contesting Spain, the Dynamics of Nationalist Movements in Catalonia and the Basque Country. Welcome to the show.
Good evening.
The France 24 debate on Facebook and Twitter, the hashtag F24debate. The official communiques to be followed up by a peace conference announced for Friday in the French Basque Country. International mediators and former Northern Ireland Republican leader Gerry Adams to attend, but Spain's conservative Prime Minister Mariano Rajoy dismissing ETA's announcement as noise and propaganda. On the Spanish side of the border, public opinion divided. Yuka Royer has more.
The disbanding of ETA brings an end to Europe's last armed insurgency. More than 800 people died during the group's 60-year struggle for independence. In San Sebastian, people welcomed the news with mixed feelings.
We suffered a lot from terrorism for many years. Without a just cause, it's great news that terrorism will go away.
Calm will return to the streets, but the reason why ETA was born remains.
Formed during Franco's dictatorship, ETA first came to prominence with the assassination of the general's presumed successor, Luis Carrero Blanco, in 1973. Even after the fall of the dictatorship, the group's bloody campaign for independence continued, with ordinary citizens falling victims. In 1987, 21 people died when ETA staged a deadly bomb attack in Barcelona. The group also targeted security officers in car bombs. Teresa Diaz is the daughter of a police officer killed by the Basque separatists.
I'm very sad. All those years of terrorism came to nothing. It was difficult for us to continue living in the Basque Country, and the insurgents didn't get what they wanted in the end.
Pro-independence political leader Arnaldo Otegi, who was once jailed for his links to ETA, welcomed the latest development, but he also criticised the Spanish government for keeping 225 former members of the group in jails far away from the Basque Country.
The group's dissolution will help ease the pain of the families of ETA's victims. Now we have to help ease the pain of other families, those of jailed Basque separatists.
After 6 decades of bloodshed, ETA may finally be gone, but its dissolution has left a bitter aftertaste. Survivors and victims' families warn that reconciliation won't be easy, while support for Basque nationalism remains strong.
Now, that official communique, Edward Salsas, includes an apology. Did the apology go far enough?
I don't think that the apology was enough, at least for the victims. There's no unconditional apology. There's I would put it this way, like a soft apology for the civilian victims, but not for the military victims. And there have been many policemen and many soldiers who were killed by ETA. So I believe that a big part of the Spanish society thinks that this apology is not enough. It's not enough. It should have been an unconditional apology. So in a way, this will give an argument to this unforgiving part of the society that they have suffered a lot from this conflict, and it's great news that ETA is being permanently dissolved. But this will give them a reason to still fight against the last, I would say, claims from the ETA movement followers, which is, as the report was putting very clearly, the ETA prisoners are kept far away from the Basque Country, and this is a sentence not for the prisoner himself, but for the family. So it puts them in a difficult situation, and the families of the victims want to prevent these prisoners from, being moved back to prisons in the Basque Country.
Yeah, a similar complaint has been made by the families of Corsican separatists here in France, saying they'd like to see their loved ones closer to home. Gorka Jabarrieta, do you agree that that apology should have gone further?
Well, I think that ETA's statement during the past days acknowledged all the victims, and in that sense, I think that it is a very important step forward. As a consequence of this conflict in the Basque Country, there have been many victims from all sides, from many different violences. And I think that in that sense, ETA's statement is a very important step forward. I also think that on the issue of reconciliation and on the issue of building a new scenario in the Basque Country, the best scenario for the Basque people, all the different actors, political parties, Spanish government, etc., we should all come together and do similar acknowledgements on the issue of the suffering that many different people has been going through in this country. And then again, today is the end of an era. ETA has announced its dissolution, and it will not exist longer. So we are in a new scenario. And even if we are in a new scenario, there are still human rights violations going on today in the Basque Country. And my previous commentator was referring to the dispersal policy of Basque political prisoners. How is it possible that still today, 7 years after ETA announced the end of the armed campaign, Basque prisoners are dispersed to hundreds of kilometers from their hometown? How is it possible that Rajoy is the only prime minister of Spain after the death of Franco that has not tried to approach the resolution of the conflict in the Basque Country through dialogue and agreement, like elsewhere, like we have seen in South Africa, in Ireland? I think it's on the best interest of everybody, Basque society, Spanish society, European society, to build a lasting peace scenario in the Basque Country.
Let's hear from the Spanish Prime Minister. He has come out this Thursday with a very strong statement indeed. Mariano Rajoy saying we don't owe them anything and we have nothing to thank them for.
ETA can announce its disappearance, but its crime does not disappear, nor do the efforts to pursue and punish them. ETA has been defeated by the rule of law and the strength of Spanish democracy. That is the only truth that shines above all the hot air and comments we're hearing these days.
So, Gorka, let me ask you, how do you bring someone like Mariano Rajoy to the table? Because there's not going to be a full closure, is there, with that kind of rhetoric?
Yeah, it seems unlikely that Mariano Rajoy will change its policy towards the resolution of the conflict. And that's a pity, because many representatives from the international community, as well the absolute majority of parties in the Basque Country, etc., they are claiming for a different policy towards the conflict in the Basque Country.
Let me ask Caroline Gray about this. Caroline, how do you explain the words of the Spanish Prime Minister?
Well, I mean, politically, he's in a very difficult position because there are very strong victims' rights groups in Spain that have a lot of political influence over the Spanish government, over Spanish parties. And if we remember, if we look back historically, if you think back to 2006, 2007, when a previous Spanish Prime Minister, Zapatero, tried to negotiate with ETA, that was a time when a Spanish Prime Minister did try to negotiate ETA, at a time when there was a ceasefire. And then ETA broke the ceasefire at that stage. And there was a huge political backlash against Zapatero for having attempted to try to negotiate with ETA. And I think ever since then, any politician in Spain has been very wary, because even though, you know, obviously ETA has disbanded now, there's been a permanent ceasefire since 2011. Despite all that, there are still some unresolved crimes related to ETA's activities. There are still victims who feel that they haven't had justice yet. And those victims' rights groups have a lot of political pressure, a lot of political influence on the Prime Minister. And so the Prime Minister has been very reluctant to be seen to be giving any sort of legitimacy to ETA by entering into any negotiations, any discussions with international mediators, etc. So I think that explains his stance, if we look at it from that perspective.
And what's your gut feeling? Is it over? Is ETA put down its guns for good?
Yes, well, I mean, this is definitely a historic moment. I mean, ETA had been defeated by the police a long time ago, and, you know, since it has been a permanent ceasefire since 2011, unlike previous ceasefires, which were broken quite quickly, this one is definitely a permanent ceasefire. ETA has been defeated by the French and Spanish police. But I would say, you know, that's a military defeat, but the goals, as ETA's made clear in its statements recently, their actual goals for an independent Basque country, for the unification of the Basque and Navarran regions are still there. It's just that now they're going about that by a different means, by political means, through representation in the Basque Parliament, through political parties. So the goals are still there. Yes, violence is now a thing of the past, but those goals for an independent Basque country are still there. And there is a still huge conflict over those issues, and it's yet to be seen how that will go forward. It depends a lot on political dynamics within the Basque country, what parties end up working together, what agenda they put forward for the Basque country. There's a lot that we will need to watch this space. So it's not, even though the violence is over, those goals are still there.
Yeah, and one reaction on the hashtag F24 debate from Matt: if the Basque group ETA truly dissolves, the next problem will be dissident factions and decentralized terrorist cells competing with each other. Dissidents could use violence and attacks as a means of rebranding, as is the case with the ELN and the FARC in Colombia. Gorka El Harabiata, we saw that with the real IRA in Northern Ireland, for instance. Is that a real fear, a possibility that we could see splinter groups?
No, it is not a real possibility. It is true that elsewhere in other conflict areas, when such decisions have been taken, splinter groups have taken and have continued with the violence. But in the case of the Basque Country, even though obviously probably not everybody has agreed with the last decisions of ETA, there is not any such group willing to continue with violence. Violence has disappeared once and for all from our political equation. And now we should use the opportunity to build a lasting peace scenario in our country.
Why now then, Edward Salzas?
Well, I believe that violent movements and terrorist movements are something from the past. I mean, it's clear that in the 21st century, to pursue a political goal and to claim for independence through the means of violence is something from the past, and that the way we do things in the 21st century is through politics and through democracy. That's why it's so important, and we look to have a closer view on what's happening in Spain to see that, and I totally agree with one of my co-commenters, it's that the political goals have not disappeared in the Basque Country. The nationalist parties still are a majority and now are in the government, the regional government, the same as in Catalonia. So the political goals are there. It's just the way to achieve these political goals through violence is something from the past, and it's something that will not come back. And I think that all the independentist movements in Spain have understood that violence is not the way, and the way is through politics. And that's why it's so important, I believe, that now in the Spanish society, there's an introspection and a dialogue between the different parties and the different political movements to try to reconciliate all these differences and try to see if they can live together, and if they cannot, the way they can split in a non-violent way. That's what we all want.
Yeah, in his book, Talking to Terrorists, Jonathan Powell points to the 2004 Madrid train station bombings, writing effectively it puts ETA out of business. There were 191 killed, nearly 2,000 wounded. After that, he wrote, what armed group was going to want to match Al-Qaeda? Do you agree with that, Gorka Eleharabrieta?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look to this whole process from a historic point of view, you will see that ETA was born in '58 on the eve of the Cuban Revolution, on the eve of the Algerian Revolution, when armed groups were being created all around the globe. And then also it came to a conclusion also in a very different scenario, on which most of those national liberation movements that at one point decided to take up arms have gone through processes to leave violence behind. You have the cases of Salvador, Nicaragua, later on South Africa, Ireland, and after ETA put an end to its armed campaign, others came, like the peace process in Colombia, now in Burma, etc. So I really think that, and I agree with my previous commentator, that those tactics, those tools are a thing of the past, and they are not to be repeated again. And again, and I also agree, the political agenda is still there. And in grown-up democracies, we have to find ways of dealing with political disputes politically.
All right, what Basque Separatists wants is something we'll pick up on when we come back. Stay with us. You're watching the France 24 debate. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate. We're talking on the day when ETA officially put out a communique saying it was laying down its weapons for good. The Basque separatist movement, which had installed a permanent ceasefire back in 2011. We're talking about it with attorney and commentator Edward Salsas. Welcome back as well to Gorka Eleharabrieta, head of the international affairs at left-wing nationalist party Sortu, who joins us from San Sebastian in the Spanish Basque Country, and from Birmingham in England, Caroline Gray, who teaches at Aston University, co-author of Contesting Spain, the Dynamics of Nationalist Movements in Catalonia and the Basque Country. Caroline, we were talking just before the break about how armed political violence is something outdated in the 21st century. My question to you, though, is you had the movement which begins, ETA, under the dictatorship of Franco. After Franco dies, why did it keep on being an armed movement?
Well, even though there was a democratic transition, a new Spanish constitution, the separatists had not achieved an independent Basque Country, which is what they wanted. And so their goals still hadn't been realized. So they did continue with violence. But eventually, it took a long time, but eventually they realized that was actually becoming counterproductive to them achieving their goals, because ETA divided into a political arm and a military arm. And the political arm, which then became involved with Batasuna, which was the previous Sortu, as it were, they realized that actually they were doing better at elections in the Basque Country when ETA had a ceasefire, because there were a number of ceasefires in the past that were then broken. And they realized that politically they did better when ETA was having a ceasefire, because there were people who would vote for them if there wasn't violence. And so I think that gradually contributed to the realization that violence is not actually helping us. And obviously, since democracy had been established in Spain, there was much less tolerance within society of a terrorist group than there had been under Franco.
Gorka Eleharabrieta, the separatist movement in Catalonia is long-rooted as well. Why was that one peaceful and the one in the Basque Country that included an armed movement?
Well, I mean, both in Catalonia and in the Basque Country, there has been for several decades and generations claims for more democracy, for the possibility, for the right to decide upon our future freely. But the developments of those movements have been, from the very beginning, very different. And for many different reasons, in the Basque Country, that resistance movement against Francoism took the form of an armed organization, and in Catalonia didn't. And I have to say that the democratic transition, that unlike in other dictatorial regimes, was not or did not meant the defeat of the dictator, but it was done with the dictator, with all the consequences that that brought. The problem was not that it did not brought independence to the Basque Country. We make a clear difference between our political agenda and the peace agenda. The claim was for democracy, meaning for the possibility of Basques to decide upon their future and what kind of relation they want to have with the Spanish state. And yes, it is true, we want an independent Basque country, and we accept and respect that there are others that have different approach, different agenda for the Basque Country. But the issue here, the core issue, the issue of the conflict that still remains is that unlike in other parts of Europe, like Scotland and elsewhere, in the Basque Country, in Catalonia, within the Spanish state, there is no possibility still in the 21st century for such decisions to be done democratically. Let's say by voting and respecting the will of the majority of the people. And that's the core of the conflict. And that conflict still remains unsolved.
All right, so there isn't the devolutionary sort of framework that exists in the British Isles, but you do have a regional parliament, you draw your own taxes there. There's a large degree of autonomy in the Basque Country. Gorka, what is it that you want? You say you still want independence?
We want independence, but the core issue here is not whether we have independence or not. The core issue here is that, yeah, we have an autonomy, we have devolved competencies, but we still don't have the capacity to decide upon our future. And we think that we Basques, the Basque people, is a grown-up people that can make decisions by its own. And we do not understand how is it possible in Scotland to have a referendum and not to have same outcomes in the Basque Country or in Catalonia. And look at the result. Where is the political situation more destabilized? In Scotland, after having a referendum, or in the Spanish state, without the possibility of having such referendums?
Edward Sazas, you agree?
Well, I believe that he's partially right by saying that there's no possibility in Spain. There's no current legal possibility to decide and for a region to decide their own future and if they want to remain in the Spanish state or to leave. The core issue is that, there are some regions in Spain, such as the Basque Country and Catalonia, which have an autonomy and a certain degree of autonomy, a great degree of autonomy. But what we've seen in Catalonia, and I think that, well, my friend from the Basque Country maybe can confirm it, but what we've seen is that actually the Spanish government can eliminate this autonomy with the signature of a decree. And that's what happened in Catalonia. They suspended the autonomy, they just suspended the Catalan government, and now the Spanish government is ruling on Catalonia. So basically what we've seen in the last months in Spain is that we have a democratic system where the different regions have an autonomy, but still the Spanish central government has the power to eliminate and to suspend this autonomy with the signature of a decree. So basically, I think that the claim that Sortu is making is that they want to have the choice, they want to have the possibility to choose if they remain in Spain or if they leave. What we see in the polls for the next election in the Spanish government is that a party, Ciudadanos, is rocketing and will probably be the next ruling party in Spain. And this party, Ciudadanos, he wants to touch the autonomous system for the Basque Country. It has lasted for all the democracy, which they have a great degree of autonomy, and they want to touch that. And this will bring a lot, I believe, a lot of political problems in the Basque Country. So it's great news that ETA has been dissolved. It's great news that the Basque society refuses to use violence. It's great news, but the problem will still be there, and we still have many episodes to see in this tension between the Basque Country and the central government, in the tension between the Catalan society and the central Spanish government, because the problem is still there. The constitution has a locked system where nobody can live, and the problem will still be there until people can choose as a grown-up society whether to stay or whether to leave.
Caroline Gray, how's Spain's democracy doing?
Well, it's at a crossroads, I would say, because, you know, there's been huge political change in the wake of the financial crisis. Has brought new political parties in Spain due to the dissatisfaction with the old parties. So we've seen the emergence of, my colleague was just talking about Ciudadanos, one of the new parties, which is a centre-right, very centralist party, another new party, Podemos, which is a left-wing party. Then obviously we've had the rise of the pro-independence movement in Catalonia. So actually Spain is very much at a time of questioning. I mean, currently the government in Spain is the weakest minority government that Spain has ever had since the transition to democracy. So it is really at a crossroads, but what we're seeing is that parties are not coming together really to find solutions. There's just a lot of conflict between parties on what's the best way forward. So it's quite a complicated situation right now. And I would say, you know, that complicated situation we're seeing at central government level, we're also seeing, you know, within the regions. I mean, if we talk about the Basque Country and what the Basque political parties want, there are huge divisions there. I mean, the Basque parliament is always very divided. There's never a party that gets an absolute majority. So it's always a question of different parties forming alliances to govern. And at the moment, you've got the Basque Nationalist Party governing with the Basque Socialists. But, you know, this is a fragmented parliament. If they change alliances, maybe the Basque Nationalist Party ends up allying with EH-Bildu at some point. That would mean something different. So I think Spain, in a lot of areas, is really at quite a fundamental crossroads at the moment.
All right, let me ask you another question, Caroline, because you have, again, there's this mediation. I don't know whether it's a ceremony or a talk that's taking place on the French side of the border on Friday. Gerry Adams is due to attend, the former head of Sinn Féin, the Northern Irish Republican Party. There's this sort of strain that comes from the left that's associated with these movements. What's going to be going forward the face of regional movements? What are regional movements going to be about in Europe?
Well, I think it's very difficult to make any generalizations because the different regional movements we're seeing, the different nationalist movements are all very different, actually. And, you know, it just simply, I mean, Gorka was mentioning a lot comparisons with Scotland before. I mean, if you look at Scotland, actually, the Basque Country has a lot more fiscal powers, a lot more policy competences than Scotland. But then, you know, Scotland had the right to a referendum, the Basque Country didn't. And different regions really, I think, want very different things. I mean, even if we compare the Catalan and the Basque case, they're not actually looking for the same things right now. Yes, you have got EH-Bildu looking for independence in the Basque Country, but EH-Bildu currently has 17 seats out of 75 in the Basque Parliament. The Basque Nationalist Party, which is potentially its closest ally, doesn't actually want independence. It wants a form of co-sovereignty with Spain, some sort of free association, but not full independence. So again, what we're seeing in the Basque Country is actually different from what we're seeing in Catalonia. So I think it's very difficult to make generalizations about what's happening in regions in Europe, because there's a lot of differences between them.
All right, I was pretty sure you'd roll your eyes when I asked you to generalize about it, but let me ask you, Edward Salzas, one question about this, because we had the referendum that was the ban referendum in Catalonia last October, and then afterwards we saw in northern Italy two regions who decided to have referendums, informal referendums, consultations on greater autonomy. Is there a trend at all, or is it really, as Caroline said, you know, each case is different and we shouldn't extrapolate?
Probably the cases are different and the claims are different, but there's definitely a trend, and there's a questioning on the current system and the current state structures that we have in Europe. So I believe that Natalie's totally right when she says that you cannot compare the Catalan case with the Northern Italy case, with the Corsica, with Scotland. It's very different histories, but there's still a trend of questioning these state structures, the states that we have now, and I believe that this is a debate that should be held within each state. What national project wants Spain to have or Italy to have, but also in the European Union, because we see this idea of the Europe of the regions and no longer the European Union of the states.
And those who pour scorn on these separatist movements in Catalonia, in northern Italy, say, well, these movements are basically richer regions saying we don't want to pay for the poorer ones.
Well, I think that it's a little bit more complex than this. I think that there's, and what we've seen in the last few years is that there's a lot more than economic claims, and what we see is that the solutions that have been proposed by central governments, economic solutions, no longer work. There's something else to think about, and I think that it's the political project that we need to think about, and not just the financial project or the economic project. It's a question of thinking what kind of society in Spain and in Europe we want to have.
That stereotype that you sometimes hear, Gorka ele Harabieta, of Catalans complaining about lazy Andalusians, this kind of thing. What's it like in the Basque Country? How much solidarity do Basques feel with people from other parts of Spain?
I mean, to start with, I think, let me also refer to the Catalans. I think that both in Catalonia and in the Basque Country, when we refer to a Catalan or to a Basque, we're speaking about everybody living and working in the Basque country and in Catalonia, no matter where they come from, no matter whether they come from Andalusia, whether they come from Norway, whether they come from Morocco. We're speaking about the people and the people living in those areas. The issue here is, and let me put it in a different way, is that, and I agree with what has been said so far, is that if the Basque Country and Catalonia, instead of being in the Spanish Kingdom, if they will be in Sweden, in the UK, in Finland, in any other European countries, political disputes will exist, but the way of dealing towards them from the state will be different, will be from a democratic approach. And the issue is that within the same European Union, we have different ways of dealing with such issues. And we are going to have referendums in the short future. There is a referendum in New Caledonia coming up soon. A referendum also in the Faroe Islands in next October. And how is it possible that within the same framework, Catalans are being prosecuted, arrested, or forced into exile because of promoting a referendum, and others are doing them without any kind of problem? Political disputes exist, will ever exist. But the way to solve them is through dialogue and agreement. Never, never through repression. Never. And Spain has to learn a lot from that. And in grown-up democracies, these issues are dealt with politically. And this is a lesson that we have to learn, and that Spain has to learn.
And in your view, is the Spanish Basque Country one and the same country as the French Basque Country?
Well, myself, I live in the French Basque Country, for instance. And now I'm speaking to you from the Spanish Basque Country. And I speak Basque in both sides of the border, and I feel Basque in both sides of the border. But obviously, there is a reality, which is that the Basque Country is divided. And we consider that the principle of consent, in the same way that the principle of consent was accepted in Northern Ireland in order to achieve the Good Friday Agreement, meaning that unless there is a majority in the north of the Basque Country, in the French Basque Country, a majority in the south of the Basque Country, in the Spanish Basque Country, that want this union to happen, that union won't happen. And let me say something. Caroline was referring to the division that there is in the Basque Parliament, and it is true. We have a lot of disputes on many different issues. But let me tell you something. Ever since the Basque Parliament exists, there is an absolute majority of MPs, of representatives in the Parliament, that are advocating for the right to decide. And in today's Parliament, it is true. EH Bildu has 18, not 17, but 18 MPs. But there are 60 MPs out of 75 which are in favor of the right to decide. 60 out of 75. The Partido Popular and the Socialist Party are very small parties in the Basque Country, similarly to their size in Catalonia as well. How is it possible that having such a majority in favor of the right to decide, we still don't have the possibility to decide upon our future?
All right, well, definitely an issue that we will continue to follow as we see how it all unfolds. I want to thank you so much, Gorka Elehalabreta, for being with us from San Sebastian, Caroline Gray for joining us from Birmingham, Edward Salsas. Stay with us. Media Watch is next.